Welcome to my June 2025 essay/interview of myself. I was walking my dog the other day and I was like, do other people ever interview themselves in their heads? Like, ask yourself an interesting question as if you were a famous person getting interviewed and then think your way through the answer and interrogate yourself about it? I'm just going to pretend that you do, because I definitely do this. I was afraid no one else did this. We're going to pretend you do. What a relief. Here is my interview with myself. How important is it to ask good questions? Well, in my lifetime, there has been a lot of emphasis on it's all about the questions you ask. And I don't disagree with this, but I would add that it is not enough to just ask the questions. We have to try to answer them. Then we have to interrogate those answers, toss them around with other people, test them against different life experiences, and answer them again on a rainy day when we're hungry. Is elite level athletic or artistic achievement possible with value-centric teaching in which the athletes or artists exercise autonomy? Or is this elite level achievement only possible within the context of authoritarian directive training? Honestly, this is the question I have centered my career around for the last 10 years. There is a tried and true way to create amazing dancers, gymnasts, and circus artists. It is a well-established traditional formula, and it goes something like this. You start around age 3 or 4. You use directive training inside a really narrow movement solution space. Only certain kinds of movement are lauded or allowed. And then you reap the rewards of that training as the artist or athlete grows up. You pointedly ignore the dropout and injury rate because elite achievement is, definitionally, only going to happen for a few people. Now, the question of whether elite level achievement can exist outside of this model raises several uncomfortable facts about how we treat children and the ways in which it is socially acceptable to treat children differently than adults. That is the moral objection to this type of training, which I'm not going to address more fully here because I actually think there is a more interesting argument to be made. I'll rest the moral argument on the idea that I believe in the moral argument, and if you put me against someone who's arguing that it is moral to treat children this way, I will go to bat for that idea. I think it is the stronger argument here. But there is a more interesting argument that exists in some of the emerging trends in sports science and motor skill development, which indicate that motivation, positive association, and mental state have a lot more to do with elite achievement than we might have previously assumed. I would say that value-centric training that centers the autonomy of the learner, allows for experimentation and creativity, and encourages accurate self-assessment skills has the potential to at least meet, if not exceed, the current levels of elite achievement that we see within this older, more traditional model. Now, I will be the first to admit that this idea is largely, if not entirely, untested in research and is only starting to emerge in movement coaching practice. We have to remember that because it takes about 20 years for an athlete to age up, the actual practice of these methods has only gotten started within the last 5 to 10. And so we haven't seen the athletes who are coming up in this model reach their potentials yet. But most, if not all, of the elite athletes whose training I've been privy to still follow pretty strict regimens in almost every aspect of their lives, from the food that they eat to their sleep schedules to their training schedules. They often employ professional nutritionists or work with nutritionists at some point in their career. They work with trainers and coaches to manage their programming, and those skills and knowledge sets are kind of mutually exclusive to the actual skills of the athlete themselves. An athlete at this level can't meaningfully self-direct their training. It's too complex. And so the question I come to, which interests me even more, is a bit more specific. Can we prepare children or young adults for elite physical achievement in value-centric ways? Or can we reduce the exploitation of, say, pre-professional college athletes? On the first question, I think we certainly can prepare children and young adults for elite physical achievement in value-centric ways. And on the second, reducing the exploitation of college athletes, I believe that we could, but that the forces in play in college athletics are too powerful and influential to be swayed, despite the fact that college athletics play a critical role in the development of pre-professional athletes. The evidence and social pressure for a value-centric model in the college space would have to be an order of magnitude higher than it currently is to affect any change in that system. Has the professionalization, dare I say, industrialization of the performing arts over the last 100 years been a net positive for the United States? What about for the world? Let me begin this answer by defining what I think professionalization means. 100 years ago or so, the pathways to performance were many and varied. But starting around the 1930s, we began to see the emergence of a professional class of performers. This group was educated at organized trade schools, colleges, universities, or conservatories, and slotted into careers via an organized, if somewhat invisible or opaque, set of processes. This pipeline reached its zenith during my generation in the late 90s and early 2000s in the United States, and I will call the creation and maintenance of this sort of pipeline to becoming a performer professionalization. We quickly come up against the question of which fields count as performing arts. I'm going to answer that one quickly and decisively for this essay by saying that performing arts includes all performers, but not the other professions associated with production. So for this moment, yes, I am talking about stage and screen actors, dancers, musicians, and acrobats, whether they record or perform live. No, I am not talking about stage managers, writers, producers, painters, set painters, propsmen, or cameramen. Certainly, those professions play critical roles in the performing arts industry, but by and large, I think the professionalization of those roles and the unions and guilds which protect them do more to create a net positive than they do for the performers themselves. I would say that the professionalization of the first disciplines, acting, dancing, music, acrobatics, was, in fact, so unsustainably negative that we can see the boundaries and gatekeepers of this professionalization completely transforming year to year over the last 10 years. Agents, managers, and fine arts colleges have diminishing influence except at the very top levels of the industry and are almost completely culturally irrelevant in terms of the training that they provide or purport to provide. The democratization effect that we've seen from the internet and social media has given everyone access to the potential to build an audience and leverage that audience into a performing career. For a topical case, we can look at Benito Skinner, the creator, writer, and star of the hit show Overcompensating. He followed what is now a reasonably well-trod path over the last 10 years to producing, writing, and acting. He cut his chops not on stages or as a stand-up or through an agent, but on Instagram and TikTok, accruing massive followings, which he leveraged into in-person performance opportunities and eventually a TV show contract. The gatekeepers of old, like agents, teachers, casting directors, university admissions, still hold some power to key levels of the performance industry, but by and large, at the entry level, everyone is a potential star and everyone is a gatekeeper of their own follow button. The cultural relevancy of YouTube stars is debatably much higher than the cultural relevancy of, say, the Lincoln Center or Broadway, which don't even really enter the discussion until they produce a piece of recorded media like Wicked. While mega pop stars undoubtedly have greater cultural relevance than theater, even most pop or rock concerts pale in comparison to YouTube celebrities like Mr. Beast or Twitch streamers like Hassan Piker or podcasters like Joe Rogan, all of whom have vastly greater daily reach and potentially greater cultural significance. I view this entire process as a reaction to the classist and opaque systems of performance gatekeeping that ruled the industry in the 80s and 90s, when college was considered an important requisite, not just for networking, but also for skill development. While this is arguably still true in circus, at least the networking part, circus has always lagged behind the other performance forms, especially in the United States. And in this case, many professional circus performers make more selling online courses and teaching exotic retreats than they make performing on a contract, even if that contract is with the largest companies. When I say that circus has lagged behind the United States, I don't mean artistically or in quality. I mean in this process of professionalization. We saw the university systems professionalize theater and dance. We never saw university systems professionalize circus, which maintained its sort of outsider status, at least in the United States. What is the supposed purpose of professional arts versus what actual purpose do they serve? As for the purposes of professional performance, I think they are as many and as varied as they always were. But in 2025, it is more important than ever to justify the in-person nature of live performances. That could have been a TikTok, and the Insta clips were better, are two comments I heard after some recent live performances that I was at. Pretty biting criticisms that I didn't entirely disagree with. The value of the performances was being considered in terms of their relationship to the online space rather than on its own merits, and the significance of the in-person nature of the performance was entirely relevant to these spectators. The way the performance was evaluated was, would this have worked online, on my phone, right? I'm going to consider the value of the live performance in relation to how it would exist in the online space, not vice versa. The purported purpose of the professional performing arts is often centered around some kind of community building, but the actual purpose often seems to be the maintenance of class structures. When the access to performance is controlled by colleges and universities, either formally through residencies and the means of creating performance work, or informally through the social networks born out of those universities, then the cost or ability to attend these universities and colleges becomes a dividing feature between those who can create performance work and those who can't. In countries where this extra training doesn't propagate those class barriers, i.e. where arts university is free or highly subsidized, or the development of work is subsidized by the government grant rather than the private foundation, I think professionalization was less negatively impactful than it was here in the US. The result of this lack of access to college and university is sometimes lauded as the key ingredient for American innovation in the arts, but I think this is actually a really poor line of argument. It reminds me of the question we addressed earlier about value-centric teaching, in which we saw that treating children basically as animals produces incredible athletes. We can also see the exploitative American arts system, in which would-be artists are exploited at every level of education and career, tends to leak around the edges, as artists find new ways to avoid student debt, get exposure through other means, and game the system, which is asking them to enter this proprietary pipeline when that pipeline costs them money and all they want to do is make some art and have people see it and get paid money for it. The fact that this system produces new and exciting means to create art and new art at the cost of duress only appears reasonable when we look at the success stories that it produces, never when we examine the thousands or millions of young people and adults whose exploitation fuels those successes. What do I think is the most important thing that performance makers can do today? Man, I have a lot of thoughts on this one, but I'm going to leave those thoughts to the reader's imagination a bit and instead share a couple of my favorite quotes that come to mind when I hear this question. The first is a quote from a famous theater philosopher from the early 1900s, Antonin Artaud. If there is still one hellish, truly accursed thing in our time, it is our artistic dallying with forms, instead of being like victims burnt at the stake, signaling through the flames. The other is the Why Cheap Art Manifesto from the Bread and Puppet Theater in Vermont in 1984. People have been thinking too long that art is a privilege of the museums and the rich. Art is not business. It does not belong to the banks and fancy investors, or Adam adds, the tech companies. Art is food. You can't eat it, but it feeds you. Art has to be cheap and available to everybody. It needs to be everywhere because it is the inside of the world. Art soothes pain. Art wakes up sleepers. Art fights against war and stupidity. Art sings hallelujah. Art is for kitchens. Art is like good bread. Art is like green trees. Art is like white clouds in blue sky. Art is cheap. Hurrah.